Imagine for a moment that you're standing behind a counter, steam wand in hand, creating latte art while half listening to the morning news. The familiar rhythm of grinding beans, the comforting warmth of ceramic cups, the quiet hum of conversation. This is your universe. Now picture that universe cracking open as warships darker than space itself descend from the sky, their weapons trained not on military installations or world leaders, but on your modest coffee shop. This isn't the opening scene of a blockbuster film. This is where our story begins, in a reality where the fate of humanity rests not with soldiers or scientists, but with a 28-year-old barista named Leo Chen, who just perfected his maple cinnamon foam technique. Across the galaxy, countless civilizations have risen and fallen. Empires spanning star systems have crumbled to dust, and now a single alien armada threatens to extinguish Earth's light forever. Their ultimatum wasn't what anyone expected, not the surrender of nuclear codes or political leaders, but the immediate handover of one unassuming coffee artisan. As global networks broadcast the incomprehensible demand, Leo stood frozen behind his espresso machine, wondering if he'd somehow messed up a customer's oat milk cappuccino order badly enough to warrant interstellar retaliation. The very absurdity of the situation became its own kind of terror, because when reality stops making sense, that's when you know you're standing at the edge of something extraordinary. What you're about to witness is more than just another science fiction tale. It's a journey into the heart of what makes us human in a universe that's forgotten how to hope. We'll explore how the simplest acts of kindness can ripple across light years, how a perfectly crafted beverage might hold the key to salvation, and why sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who save us all. This story asks what happens when cosmic destiny walks into your neighborhood cafe and orders a double-shot macchiato with extra sprinkles. So find a comfortable seat, perhaps with your favorite drink in hand, as we step into a world where the last hope of the galaxy wasn't a warrior or a genius, but a human barista who believed that everyone deserved a good cup of coffee, no matter what planet they called home. The morning's chaos had barely settled when the air behind the counter began to shimmer, not with heat from the espresso machine, but with a light that seemed to fracture reality itself. Two figures emerged from the glare, their forms towering and sleek, encased in armor that seemed to drink the light from the room. They were nothing like the bulky, monstrous invaders on the news feeds. These beings moved with a terrifying, graceful precision. Leo could only stare, a damp cloth still clutched in his hand, the scent of spilled oat milk suddenly mingling with something metallic and ozone. He expected to be vaporized on the spot. Instead, the taller of the two figures inclined its head, its featureless faceplate reflecting his own stunned expression back at him. Its voice was a cascade of synthesized tones, somehow both melodic and utterly alien. Leo Chen, it stated, the name echoing with an unnatural resonance. We are arbiters of the celestial accord. We have traversed the void between the spiral arms to locate the source of the harmonic resonance. Leo's mind raced, trying to connect the words to anything that made sense. Harmonic resonance, he'd been frothing milk. The alien's appendage, a slender, multi-jointed limb, gestured toward the espresso machine. Your creation, the beverage you designate a cinnamon maple horizon, has generated a quantum signature that has not been detected in this galaxy since the fading of the last great civilization. The explanation that followed was beyond any science Leo understood. They spoke of a dying galactic core, a spinning vortex of energy that fed on stability and harmony, which had been decaying for millennia, causing stars to flicker and civilizations to fall into silent despair. Their entire armada, they revealed, was not an invasion force but a desperate search party. For eons, they had sought a frequency, a perfect molecular alignment that could sing the core back into balance. They had scanned ancient temples, harnessed the power of neutron stars, and decoded the light from the first galaxies, all in vain. The key, it turned out, wasn't in a grand equation or a powerful crystal. It was in the way heated air was forced through finely ground coffee, in the precise emulsification of maple syrup and fat within steamed milk, in the exact pressure applied to create microfoam, a series of actions Leo performed on autopilot every single day. Your primitive apparatus and ingredients have, through a confluence of variables we do not yet comprehend, achieved a perfection our greatest science could not, the second envoy said, its tone carrying what sounded like awe. The lattice structure of the foam, the harmonic vibration of the combined molecules, it is a symphony, it is the anthem of stability. Leo stood there, the absurdity of it all washing over him. He hadn't discovered a new particle or solved a cosmic equation. He'd just been trying to make a drink that would get a 5-star review on the cafe's app. His greatest achievement, the thing that had brought alien ambassadors to his door, was essentially a very, very good latte. That staggering revelation hung in the air for only a second before the entire front wall of the cafe exploded inwards. Shards of brick and glass erupted like shrapnel, the force of the blast hurling tables and chairs across the room. Through the new, gaping hole in the world, 3 hulking figures clad in jagged, spiked armor stomped into the devastation, their weaponized limbs humming with malevolent energy. These were the scouts of the enemy armada, the ones who had issued the ultimatum, and they had just found what they were looking for. The Galactic envoys instantly shifted into defensive postures, energy shields flickering to life around them as the lead scout leveled a pulsating cannon not at them but directly at Leo. The hunt for the barista had just moved from the global stage to his very own ruined cafe. His training didn't cover intergalactic firefights, muscle memory, however, did. As a plasma bolt sizzled past his ear and vaporized a stack of ceramic mugs, Leo didn't think, he just moved. His hand snapped out, not for a weapon, but for the heavy, familiar handle of his portafilter, the polished metal still warm from the last pulled shot. It felt solid, real, an anchor in a world that had just dissolved into screaming energy and shattered glass. One of the celestial envoys, its shield flaring bright violet under the assault, shouted over the din, its synthesized voice strained with an urgency that needed no translation. The artisan, the recipe cannot fall into Xylo's hands, the fate of the core depends on it. Xylo's, the name hung in the scorched air, a label for the nightmare. The envoy's plea cut through Leo's panic, reframing everything in an instant. This wasn't about him, it was about the cinnamon maple foam. It was about the recipe. The most valuable thing in the galaxy wasn't a weapon or a shield, it was the steps he took to make a $10 drink. As another blast rocked the foundation, the second envoy slammed a device onto the floor. The air in the center of the cafe didn't just tear, it folded, peeling back reality itself to reveal a shimmering, silent corridor of swirling light, a portal. Now, the envoy commanded. A plasma bolt meant for Leo's head was intercepted by a flickering energy shield, the impact sending a shower of sparks across the counter. In that split second, Leo's eyes darted to the shelf below the register. There it was, a small, unmarked bag of beans, his own special reserve blend, a dark roast he'd been perfecting for months. He lunged, his fingers closing around the brown paper bag just as a blast from a Xylo scout obliterated the espresso machine he'd been servicing that very morning. The explosion of steam, metal, and scalding water was the funeral pyre of his old life. He didn't look back. He dove through the shimmering surface of the portal, the 2 envoys covering his retreat with precise bursts of energy that held the monstrous scouts at bay for a precious half-second before they followed him through. The last thing Leo Chen saw of his cafe was the entire structure collapsing in a storm of plasma fire, the world he knew dissolving into pure, violent energy. Then the portal sealed shut, leaving him standing in an entirely new, impossibly quiet environment. his heart hammering against his ribs, the smell of ozone and burnt coffee clinging to his clothes. In one hand, he clutched the cold, heavy portafilter. In the other, he held his only remaining weapon, his last connection to home and the hope of the entire galaxy, a 1-pound bag of specially roasted single-origin beans. The silence that enveloped Leo was the first shock, a deep, profound quiet so absolute it felt like a physical presence after the deafening roar of his cafe's destruction. The air itself was different, cool and carrying a faint, clean scent like rain on metal. He was standing on a floor that seemed to be made of solidified light, a softly glowing surface that gave slightly under his worn sneakers. The walls curved upward into a high, arched ceiling, not built from steel or concrete, but grown from intricate lattices of crystalline structures that pulsed with a gentle, internal luminescence. He wasn't in a room, he was inside a living, breathing jewel. The two envoys stood beside him, their armor now retracted to reveal surprisingly humanoid, though elegantly elongated, forms with skin the color of moonlight and large, dark eyes that held depths of ancient sorrow. Before Leo could even form a question, a section of the crystalline wall dissolved without a sound, and a third being entered. This one moved with an undeniable authority, its robes flowing like liquid starlight. This was the ship's captain. Its gaze fell upon Leo, and in that look he saw not curiosity or hostility, but a weight of responsibility so immense it felt crushing. Leo Chen, the captain began, its voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated in Leo's bones. You have been brought to the Lumina, a vessel of preservation, because the entirety of the known cosmos hinges on a truth you have been unknowingly crafting. A section of the wall shimmered and transformed into a breathtaking, three-dimensional star map. It showed the Milky Way in stunning detail, but at its very center, something was terribly wrong. Instead of a bright, dense cluster of stars, the galactic core was depicted as a swirling, chaotic vortex of black and purple energy, flickering erratically like a dying light bulb. The core is the heart of this galaxy, the captain explained, a note of profound grief in its tone. It does not merely hold stars together, it emits a fundamental frequency of stability, a harmonic resonance that allows for life, for consciousness, for reality itself to cohere. For millennia, this resonance has been fading. We call this decay the Great Silence. Civilizations that once communicated across light years fall quiet, not from war, but from a creeping despair they cannot name. Stars gutter out prematurely. The universe itself is losing its song. Then the star map shifted, zooming in on the malignant energy at the core. A new presence appeared in the visualization, a jagged, aggressive signal that seemed to be actively feeding on and exacerbating the chaos. The Xylos Empire, the captain stated, the name leaving its lips like a curse. They are not conquerors in the traditional sense, they are entropy given form. They thrive on discord and decay. Their entire civilization is built upon harnessing the energy of a dying universe. A stable, harmonious galactic core is their extinction. They have spent eons seeking ways to accelerate the silence, to ensure the core collapses into a permanent state of discord from which they alone can draw power. The visualization changed one last time, focusing now on a tiny, insignificant blue planet. A single, delicate thread of golden light was shown stretching from Earth directly toward the faltering core. Your world, by a confluence of factors we may never fully understand, produced the one thing the Xylos fear above all else, a counter-frequency, a perfect, stable harmonic resonance. As the captain spoke, the visualization replayed a familiar process, the grinding of beans, the steaming of milk, the pouring of a shot, and with each step, the golden thread of light glowed brighter, its frequency directly opposing the chaotic static of the core. The drink itself, his cinnamon maple horizon, was shown in a molecular diagram, its structure a perfect crystalline lattice that vibrated at the exact frequency needed to calm the raging core. The Xylo's armada was not here to invade Earth, the captain said, its dark eyes locking with Leo's. It was here to perform a surgical extinction. They do not want your planet. They want your recipe erased from existence. They trace the resonance to its source, you. The weight of those words settled on Leo, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. He had spent years worried about customer complaints and inventory orders. The idea that his morning routine held cosmic significance was too ludicrous to process. The star map vanished and the captain leaned forward, its expression grim and utterly serious. They will hunt you, Leo Chen. They will throw everything they have at this ship, at any world that harbors you, to prevent you from completing your work. There is no margin for error. The captain's voice dropped to a near whisper, each word measured and heavy with consequence. The machinery of your cafe has been replicated in our central laboratory. You will be provided with any ingredient you require, but you must do precisely what you did on Earth. One wrong measurement, one misstep in the brew, 1 degree of excessive heat, and the resonance will not simply fail. A flawed frequency could provide the final push the Xylos need to shatter the core completely. The being paused, letting the immensity of the statement fill the crystalline chamber. One wrong brew means extinction for trillions. The replicated laboratory was a chilling mirror of his destroyed cafe, yet eerily wrong in ways that set his teeth on edge. The gleaming silver espresso machine was an exact visual duplicate of his own, but hummed with a deep, internal vibration that felt more like a power plant than a kitchen appliance. The milk steamer hissed with a pitch slightly too high, and the air smelled not of rich coffee grounds but of sterile, filtered oxygen and ozone. Arrayed around him were canisters of what he was told were perfect molecular replicas of his ingredients: Ethiopian Yirgacheffe beans, organic maple syrup, whole milk, cinnamon. They were perfect in theory, but as Leo scooped the beans into the grinder, they felt too uniform, lacking the subtle variations and tiny imperfections of the real thing. A small council of the ship's most esteemed scientific officers observed him from a respectful distance, their large, dark eyes unblinking, data slates held ready to record his every movement. The pressure was a physical weight on his shoulders. He tried to block it out, to fall back into the comforting, well-worn routine of his craft. He tamped the grounds, his hands moving on muscle memory, locked the portafilter, and initiated the pull. The liquid that streamed out was a pale, anemic brown, and it sputtered instead of flowing in a steady, honey-thick stream. He knew instantly it was under-extracted. A collective, silent tension filled the room. He steamed the milk, but the alien apparatus created a foam that was large, bubbled, and flat, lacking the velvety microfoam he prided himself on. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he poured, and the final result was a sad, beige puddle in a crystalline cup. It was, by any objective measure, a thoroughly mediocre latte. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The gentle, constant hum of the ship's engine stuttered. The soft luminescence of the walls and ceiling flickered violently, plunging the lab into stark darkness for a heart-stopping second before surging back to light. A low, resonant groan echoed through the deck plates, a sound of profound strain. Then a harsh, blaring alarm sliced through the air proximity alerts. On a main view screen that shimmered to life on one wall, 3 jagged Xylos scout ships materialized from the void, their weapons already glowing with a malevolent green charge. One of the science officers, its long fingers flying over a holographic console, spun toward Leo, its usually placid features contorted in a mix of fear and frustration. The melodic quality of its voice was gone, replaced by a sharp, synthesized urgency. The resonance is absent, the flawed frequency is acting as a beacon. Human, your world depends on your focus. They have found us. The accusation in its tone was clear. Leo's failure wasn't just a misstep in a recipe. It was a catastrophic event that had endangered the entire mission. He stared into the sad, failed drink, the weight of entire civilizations resting on his ability to do the one thing he thought he was good at, and in that moment he had never felt like more of an imposter. The galactic core wasn't just dying, he was helping to kill it. The silence after the alarm was more terrifying than the noise itself. For a single, suspended heartbeat, the only sound was the angry sputter of the failed espresso machine. Then the world dissolved into pure chaos. The heavy door to the lab didn't just open, it was wrenched from its housing in a shriek of tortured metal and sent crashing across the floor. 3 Xylos boarders filled the doorway, their jagged, obsidian armor seeming to absorb the light from the room, making them look like walking voids. Plasma rifles were leveled, their barrels glowing with a sickly green energy that promised instant disintegration. Their leader took a step forward, its movements a study in predatory grace. A distorted, guttural voice filtered through a helmet vox echoed in the crystalline chamber. The artifact now, it wasn't a request. One of the celestial envoys moved to interpose itself, but a flick of the leader's wrist sent a crackling energy whip snapping out, wrapping around the envoy's limb and sending it crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks. The other scientists scattered, their melodic cries of alarm cut short. The leader's helmeted gaze swept over the replicated cafe, lingering on the gleaming espresso machine with a look of pure, undiluted contempt before finally settling on Leo. It took another step, the clang of its armored boots on the deck plates echoing like a death knell. "Your primitive rituals are a disease," it sneered, the synthesized voice dripping with malice. "This instability, this chaos you call creation, it is a flaw in the universal system. The galaxy doesn't need a barrister, it needs order. It needs the clean, pure silence of entropy." Its weapon rose, centering on Leo's chest. "We are the cure." In that frozen instant, Leo's mind didn't race through heroic options or complex plans. It went somewhere simpler, somewhere deeply ingrained. A customer was being aggressive, threatening the peace of his cafe. His body moved on an instinct forged by years of handling hot liquids and demanding patrons. His hand, seemingly of its own accord, closed around the handle of the metal pitcher he'd just used. It was still searingly hot from the steam wand, a fact his adrenaline completely masked. As the Xylos leader took its final step, Leo didn't throw a punch or try to duck. He acted like a barrister dealing with an unruly guest. With a motion as natural as breathing, he flung the entire contents of the pitcher directly at the armored figure. He wasn't aiming for a weak point, he was aiming for the center of mass, a moving black blot of hostility. The liquid wasn't water, it was the failed, overheated, and violently over-extracted espresso from his botched attempt, a scalding, bitter sludge nearly 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The effect was instantaneous and stunning. The dark liquid hit the leader's chest plate not like a liquid but like an acid. Where the celestial envoy's energy weapons had sparked harmlessly off the armor, the superheated coffee did something else entirely. It didn't explode or burn, it seethed. The complex organic compounds and oils in the concentrated shot reacted violently with the strange, entropy-fed material of the Xylos armor. A horrific sizzling sound filled the air, and thick, acrid smoke poured from the point of impact as the alien metal actually began to pit and corrode at an astonishing rate. The leader roared in a mix of shock, pain, and utter disbelief, staggering backward and clawing at its smoldering chest plate. The 2 other boarders froze for a critical second, their tactical processors clearly unable to compute this turn of events. Their leader was being defeated not by a plasma cannon but by a thrown beverage. That half-second of stunned hesitation was all the opportunity the downed celestial envoy needed. Rolling to its feet, it unleashed a controlled burst of energy that forced the distracted boarders to take cover. "The conduit," the envoy shouted to Leo, pointing toward a previously hidden opening in the wall that now glowed with soft blue light. "Go!" Leo didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled over the counter, the scent of burnt coffee and ozone clinging to him, and plunged into the new passageway just as return plasma fire began to chew the laboratory to pieces behind him. He had just used a bad cup of coffee as a weapon, and it had worked. The galaxy needed a barista, and against all odds, he was starting to remember what that meant. The narrow escape through the ship's internal conduits left Leo disoriented and breathless, the sterile air burning in his lungs. He emerged not into another gleaming laboratory or a command deck, but into a chamber that felt profoundly different. The air here was warmer, carrying the scent of ozone and something else, something organic, like damp soil and bodies living in close quarters. The crystalline architecture of the lumina gave way to patched-together bulkheads and struts made from salvaged ship parts, hung with faded, woven tapestries depicting unfamiliar constellations. This was a refugee quarter, a pocket of desperate survival hidden within the alien vessel. He was surrounded by beings of countless forms, some with multiple eyes, others with skin that shifted color with their emotions, all bearing the same hollowed-out look of profound loss. They were the survivors of the Great Silence, the ones whose worlds had already flickered out. They watched him with a cautious, weary curiosity, but one group, clustered around a frail, ancient figure, showed no fear. Their large, liquid eyes widened not in alarm, but in something that looked like awe. They began to murmur among themselves in a soft, clicking language, their gazes fixed on Leo's hands. An envoy, its armor still smudged from the firefight, spoke softly to the eldest among them, a being so old its form seemed to be woven from light and memory more than physical matter. The elder listened, then gestured for Leo to approach. Its hands, delicate and translucent, reached out, not to take the bag of beans or the portafilter he still clutched, but to gently turn his own hands over, palms up. It studied them intently, tracing the calluses on his fingers from tamping coffee, the faint burn scars from steam wands, the permanent stain of ground beans under his nails. A profound silence fell over the chamber. The elder closed its eyes, and when it spoke, its voice was like the rustle of dry leaves, yet it carried through the room with absolute clarity, translated by a small device on its wrist. "We have waited," it began, "through the dimming of 100 suns. Our world was the first to hear the core's song grow faint. Our poets wrote of the coming silence, and our prophets spoke of a savior not from the stars but from the hearth. They did not foretell a warrior, but a maker, a creator of harmony." Its eyes opened, holding Leo's with an intensity that seemed to see straight into his soul. "The legends of my people, passed down since our skies went dark, speak of the Liquid Harmonizer. A being who would not fight the chaos with weapons, but would oppose it with a perfect, crafted balance. They said this savior would appear when the stars themselves began to weep, and would be known by hands that understood rhythm, not violence." The elder's grip on his hands tightened slightly. "Your craft, Leo Chen, is not a preparation. It is not a mere chemical reaction. It is an act of deep, intuitive listening. You are not forcing ingredients to combine. You are listening to the universe's rhythm and adding your own note to its song. The milk tells you when it is ready to be stretched. The beans reveal their flavor through the grind. The pour finds its own path into the cup. You do not command, you collaborate." The words landed on Leo not as a mystical revelation, but as a fundamental truth he had always felt but never had the language to express. He thought of the thousands of hours behind the counter, of the quiet focus required to steam milk to the exact consistency, to pull a shot at the perfect moment, to sense the subtle changes in humidity that would affect the grind. It wasn't science, it was a conversation. He was listening to the coffee, to the milk, to the very air in the room, and responding. The elder had given a name to his life's work, and in doing so, had given him the first real key to understanding it. The resonance wasn't something he created through a recipe, it was something he unlocked through attention. The universe had a rhythm, and he, a simple barista, had been quietly listening to it all along. The Lumina tore through the shimmering veil of a quantum slipstream and emerged into the silent orbit of a world that should have been a paradise. Xylos Prime was listed in the celestial archives as the sole source of the prismatic mocha bean, a seed pod that grew in crystalline caves and refracted light into miniature rainbows. The entire mission now hinged on this one final ingredient. Leo's own special blend was nearly depleted, and every replication attempt had failed to capture its unique energetic signature. But the view from the observation deck was not of a vibrant, life-giving world. It was of a tomb. The planet below was a desolate, gray sphere, its surface scarred by vast, empty riverbeds and fields of dust. Scans revealed no energy signatures, no atmospheric water vapor, no signs of vegetation or civilization, just a profound and absolute silence. The captain's usually composed features were etched with a despair so deep it seemed to dim the light around it. The readings are conclusive, it stated, its resonant voice hollow. The ecosystem has collapsed, the prismatic mocha is extinct. Without it, the resonance is impossible. The harmonic balance cannot be achieved. It turned away from the viewing port, its shoulders slumped under the weight of 1,000,000 extinguished suns. All hope is lost. A crushing weight settled in the center of Leo's chest. This was it, the end of the line. He stared out at the dead world, and for the first time he truly felt the magnitude of the great silence. It wasn't an abstract concept, it was this. It was the color gray, it was the absence of sound, it was the final, empty page of a story that would never be finished. The council of survivors behind him let out a collective sigh of grief, a sound that was more devastating than any alarm. But as Leo's eyes swept over the barren landscape, tracing the cracks and fissures of the dead river deltas below, a professional instinct, honed over a decade of spotting tiny imperfections in coffee grounds and milk texture, kicked in. The patterns in the dust weren't entirely random. In a vast, flat basin, he could make out a series of unnaturally straight lines and perfect circles, patterns that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic erosion of a naturally dead world. They were too precise, too ordered. They looked less like the work of nature and more like tire tracks and harvest rows. "Wait," he said, his voice cutting through the mournful silence. He moved closer to the viewing port, his nose almost touching the cool crystal. "Captain, can you magnify Sector 7 Gamma, those lines there?" The image zoomed in, resolving with impossible clarity. There, etched into the gray soil, were the unmistakable geometric patterns of industrial-scale agriculture, and cutting through them the deep, parallel grooves of massive vehicle treads. This wasn't a planet that had died, this was a planet that had been stripped clean. The soil, Leo said, a hot spark of anger cutting through his despair. "It's not barren, it's turned, it's been plowed recently." He pointed at the screen, his barista's eye for detail now serving a galactic purpose. "Look at the edges of those tracks. The soil hasn't settled, there's no dust collected in the grooves. This wasn't a millennia ago, this was weeks, maybe days." He turned to face the captain, the truth clicking into place with the finality of a portafilter locking into a group head. The Xylos didn't just find this planet, they didn't just destroy it, they harvested it, they took every single bean. This isn't an extinction, it's a robbery. The despair on the captain's face evaporated, replaced by a cold, furious resolve. The Xylos' strategy was now horrifyingly clear. They weren't just trying to kill the creator, they were systematically destroying the very ingredients of creation itself, seeking to erase the recipe from the universe by making it impossible to replicate. They understood that hope was a material substance, and they had just stolen the last of it. But in their haste, in their arrogant assumption that a dead world would tell no tales, they had left a signature in the dust. They had signed their work, and for the first time since he was pulled from his crumbling cafe, Leo Chen wasn't just a passive asset to be protected. He was a detective on the trail, and the clues were written in the soil. The tension after the discovery on Xylos Prime was a living thing in the ship's corridors, a thick, silent dread that made every footstep echo with finality. Hope had been replaced by a grim, grinding determination. The hunt for the stolen beans was on, but first they needed to be ready. In the replicated lab, surrounded by the anxious stares of the scientific council, Leo focused on the one thing he could control, perfecting his technique with the remaining sliver of his own special blend. Every movement was a prayer, every step a meditation. He was listening now, truly listening to the rhythm the elder had described. The water was always the first step. It had to be at precisely 196 degrees Fahrenheit, with a specific mineral balance the envoys had painstakingly recreated. He filled the gleaming pitcher, the soft splash of water, the only sound in the otherwise silent room. He turned to the machine, his mind already visualizing the pour, the microfoam, the final, perfect resonance. He engaged the steam wand, waiting for the familiar hiss. It never came. Instead, the machine emitted a weak, sputtering gurgle. The water in the pitcher remained stubbornly, chillingly lukewarm. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in his gut. This wasn't a mechanical failure. The luminous technology was millions of years beyond a simple clogged steamer. He dipped a finger into the water and brought it to his lips. The taste was unmistakable, flat, dead, chemically inert. It was the same lifeless taste of the overly filtered water from a cheap office building, water that could never properly extract the soul from a coffee bean. Someone had tampered with the water supply for his station. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse, he simply turned, his gaze sweeping over the small group of alien scientists observing him. His eyes, now trained to notice the smallest of details, didn't look for guilt in their faces but in their hands. And there it was. One of the junior science officers, a slender being with iridescent scales, was subtly trying to edge toward the door, its long, three-fingered hand nervously fiddling with a small, crystalline vial tucked against its robe. The vial was half empty. Leo moved with a calmness that surprised even himself. "You," he said, his voice low but cutting through the tension like a knife. The officer froze, its large, pupil-less eyes wide with panic. Before it could react, one of the celestial envoys was at its side, its grip firm on the being's slender arm. The vial clattered to the floor, rolling to a stop at Leo's feet. It contained a clear, viscous liquid that smelled of nothing at all, a powerful molecular neutralizer designed to strip water of all its reactive properties. The confession didn't require interrogation. It burst from the officer in a terrified, shuddering wave. "They promised," it cried out, its synthesized voice cracking with emotion. "The Xylos, they made contact, they said my world, my family. They would be spared the great silence, they would be granted a place in the ordered galaxy to come. All I had to do was ensure the harmonizer failed, just make the water neutral, make the resonance impossible. It was a small thing, a tiny betrayal to save billions." The officer slumped in the envoy's grip, its scales dulling with shame. I never believed it would truly mean the end of everything else." The silence that followed was heavier than any alarm. This wasn't an external attack, it was a sickness from within. The Xylos hadn't just stolen ingredients and launched assaults, they had weaponized despair itself. They had found the one point of leverage that could turn a well-meaning soul into a tool of universal destruction, the love for a single, tiny world. Leo looked from the traitorous officer to the horrified faces of the other scientists, and the true, horrifying scale of the conflict snapped into focus. This was a war not just of fleets and weapons, but of faith. The Xylos were proving that hope was fragile, that loyalty could be broken, and that the promise of saving one's own could make a person an accomplice to the end of all things. The stakes weren't just about winning, they were about proving that the desire to protect your own home didn't have to mean sacrificing everyone else's. The discovery of the saboteur didn't just break the tension, it shattered the last illusion of safety aboard the Lumina. The air in the lab, once filled with a fragile hope, now hung thick with a new kind of silence, one of betrayal and chilling vulnerability. The Xylos had infiltrated them without firing a single shot, turning their own desperation against them. As the compromised officer was led away, the ship's captain turned to Leo, its starlight robe seeming to dim with the weight of this internal corrosion. The primary water purification systems are compromised, it stated, its voice a low hum of controlled urgency. Our reserves of neutralizer-free water are depleted. We have nothing left that is suitable for your craft. For a moment, the sheer impossibility of it all threatened to swallow Leo whole. No water, no beans. A galaxy dying by the second, he leaned against the cold, humming replica of his espresso machine, his mind reeling. And then his eyes fell on a small, unmarked crate one of the refugee beings was cautiously opening. It was labeled in a script he couldn't read, but the symbol was universal, a stylized droplet with a line through it, emergency water rations. The being pulled out a sealed, flexible pouch and took a small, careful sip, its features immediately contorting in distaste. It was water, technically, but it was stale, flat, and heavy with preservative chemicals, the kind of sustenance liquid designed for pure survival, not for creating anything of beauty or resonance. A wild, desperate idea began to form in Leo's mind. He gestured for the pouch. "May I?" The refugee handed it over, curious. Leo tore it open and took a sip. It was worse than he imagined, warm, metallic, utterly lifeless. It was the antithesis of everything good water should be, but it was wet and it was here. The scientific council watched him, their large eyes filled with a fresh wave of despair. They saw a hopeless contaminant. Leo saw an ingredient. "Get me every ration pouch you have," he said, his voice gaining a strange new certainty. "And I need a container, anything that can hold hot liquid and has a plunger." The aliens stared, baffled. An envoy quickly retrieved a large, cylindrical canister used for storing geological samples, its sides made of a transparent, heat-resistant crystal with a simple manual plunger seal on top. It was crude, inelegant, and absolutely perfect. While the rations were gathered, Leo turned to the science officers. "The water is dead. Its molecular structure is locked down by preservatives. We need to wake it up. You said sound was part of the resonance, right? Can you generate a frequency, something clean and pure, like a single, sustained musical note?" The lead officer, though skeptical, interfaced with a console, and a moment later, a clear, beautiful, a sharp note, 440 Hz, filled the lab, emanating from a small emitter. Leo held the open container of foul-tasting ration water directly in the path of the sonic vibration. The surface of the water began to shimmer, and tiny bubbles rose from the depths as if the sound itself was scrubbing the liquid clean, agitating the dormant molecules back to life. He heated the now sonically purified water, not with the precise alien machine, but by placing the entire crystal canister into a beam of focused thermal energy, watching it carefully until tiny bubbles just began to form at the edges. It was imprecise, a guess. He ground his last precious measure of beans not to a fine espresso powder, but to a coarse consistency with his fingers, feeling the texture, letting instinct guide him. He dumped the grounds into the bottom of the makeshift press, poured the hot, singing water over them, and gave it a single, slow stir with a metal rod. For 4 agonizing minutes, the entire ship held its breath. There was no humming machinery, no digital readouts, no perfect pressure curves. There was only silence, the deep aroma of brewing coffee, and the sight of a human barista watching a crystal cylinder as if it held the secrets of the universe. When the time felt right, Leo placed his hands on the plunger. He didn't force it down. He leaned into it slowly, steadily, with the full weight of his body and his intention, filtering the dark, rich brew from the grounds. The liquid that pooled at the bottom was black as space and shimmering with tiny, prismatic oils. It wasn't a cinnamon maple horizon. It was something older, simpler, more fundamental. It was coffee, stripped bare of all pretense. Leo filled a simple metal cup and held it aloft. The scientific officers trained their sensors on it, their data slates blinking frantically. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a soft golden light began to emanate from the liquid itself. Not a harsh beam, but a gentle, pulsing luminescence that beat in time with the ship's own faltering heart. A low, stable hum filled the room, a sound of profound peace that was the direct opposite of the Xylos' screeching dissonance. On the main viewer, the terrifying chaotic static at the galaxy's core didn't vanish, but for the first time it hesitated. A single, thin thread of golden light, faint but unbreakable, stretched from the lumina toward the center, holding the line. All across the ship, lights that had been flickering surged to a steady, brilliant glow. The oppressive groaning of the overtaxed engines smoothed into a quiet, powerful purr. Life support systems reported efficiency levels not seen since the ship's launch. The makeshift brew had done what all their perfect replications could not. It had created a stable energy stream. The council stood in stunned silence, their instruments confirming the impossible. Leo looked at them, the humble metal cup warm in his hands. "You were looking for perfection," he said, his voice calm but firm, echoing in the newly powered quiet. "You recreated my machine, my beans, my syrup, down to the last atom, but you are trying to command the ingredients. You are trying to force a resonance." He gestured to the crude French press, the empty ration pouches. This wasn't perfect, it was desperate, it was messy, but every step was done with a purpose. To cleanse the water, to honor the bean, to create something good from something broken. It's not about perfection, he declared, the truth of the elder's words finally settling into his bones. It's about intention. The ship, now humming with a power born of that intention, seemed to agree. The success of the desperate French press brew was a revelation, but it was also a flare gun signaling their position to the entire Xylos armada. The ship's newfound, stable hum was almost immediately drowned out by the shriek of proximity alarms. They were no longer hiding, they were a beacon of hope in the dark, and every force of entropy in the sector was now homing in on that signal. The captain's voice boomed across the ship's comms, its usual resonant calm replaced by a sharp, tactical urgency. "Slipstream jump in 3, 2, 1. The lumina tore through the fabric of space, but the jump was short, violent, and unstable. They reverted to normal space inside a roiling, violet-hued nebula so thick it scoured the ship's external sensors, reducing their visibility to near zero. "This is the Calarian Veil," the navigator reported, its voice tight with strain. "Heavy ionic interference. Our long-range sensors are blind. Theirs will be too. It is our only chance to lose them." But the reprieve was a double-edged sword. The nebula wasn't just a cloud of gas, it was a turbulent graveyard of ancient stellar debris. On the main viewer, which now showed little more than static and violent flashes of purple light, massive, jagged asteroids materialized out of the gloom with only seconds to spare, forcing the pilot into a frantic, gut-wrenching series of evasive maneuvers. The ship shuddered and groaned, throwing everyone and everything not secured to the deck plates against walls and consoles. In the midst of this chaos, clinging to a handrail for stability, Leo received new orders from the captain. "The resonance from your last creation is already fading. The core's instability is increasing. We need a stronger signal harmonizer." Now, the directive was insane. Brew coffee now, while the floor was bucking like a rodeo bull and the sound of asteroid impacts against the shields was a constant, deafening drumbeat. But the look in the captain's eyes, transmitted via viewscreen, held no room for argument. This wasn't a request, it was a necessity of survival. Staggering like a drunkard, Leo half fell, half climbed his way back to the lab, which was now a disaster zone of spilled alien equipment and shattered crystals. The perfect replica machine was on its side, sparking feebly, but his original, salvaged portafilter lay where he'd left it, a solid, familiar piece of home amidst the insanity. He righted a small table, slammed the portafilter into its group head on a smaller, backup brewer, and began. His hands, which had trembled under the calm gaze of scientists, were now preternaturally steady. The violent lurching of the ship became a part of his process. He leaned into the turns, bent his knees with the drops, his entire body becoming a gyroscope. He was no longer just making a drink, he was performing a high-wire act on a cosmic scale. From the bridge, the frantic voice of the pilot echoed through the lab's calm. Multiple incoming, I cannot evade, 3 projectiles, massive energy signatures, they are not rocks. On a secondary screen, Leo saw them, 3 pulsating orbs of corrosive green energy, weaving through the asteroid field with malicious intelligence, ignoring the physical obstacles and homing in on the Lumina's unique harmonic signature. They were seconds from impact. Leo paid no attention. His world had shrunk to the small metal pitcher in his hand, the sound of the milk stretching and the surface of the espresso. The milk was ready. It was perfect. He began to pour, his wrist moving in a fluid, rhythmic motion. He wasn't just pouring milk into coffee, he was telling a story. A story of his morning commute, of the regulars who knew his name, of the simple joy of creating something beautiful for a stranger. The white foam flowed, coalescing into the familiar, intricate petals of a Rosetta pattern. As the final leaf of the design settled into place, a profound silence fell over the ship. The violent shaking stopped, the alarm announcing the incoming projectiles cut off mid-screech. For a single, breathtaking second, everything was still. Leo looked up at the main viewer. The 3 green orbs of energy hung motionless in the void, just meters from the ship's hull. Then, as if repelled by an invisible force field, they shuddered and shot backward, accelerating away from the Lumina at impossible speeds until they vanished into the radioactive mist. The harmonic resonance from the perfectly poured latte hadn't just created a signal, it had generated a localized bubble of pure stability, a zone where chaos and entropy simply could not exist. The violent energies of the Xylo's weapons had been neutralized and reflected by a simple, beautiful pattern in a cup. The impossible stillness that followed Leo's pour was broken not by another alarm, but by a cascade of soft, melodic chimes from the bridge's communication console. The view screen, no longer obscured by the nebula's violent static, began to populate with a breathtaking array of new signals. Dozens of ships, then hundreds, flickered into existence around the Lumina, their silhouettes a stunning tapestry of galactic diversity. There were sleek, organic vessels that seemed grown rather than built, their surfaces shimmering with bioluminescent patterns, hulking, crystalline crafts that refracted the nebula's light into rainbows, and ancient stone-like arcs that looked like they had been carved from the hearts of forgotten moons. They had been hiding, scattered and silent, waiting in the dark for a sign they feared would never come. The lead ship, a magnificent vessel shaped like a vast, unfolding leaf, opened a channel. The being that appeared on screen was ancient, its bark-like skin etched with deep grooves that told a history of unimaginable loss. This was Admiral Furion of the Sylvian Remnant. Its large, amber eyes studied the Lumina, then focused intently on the image of Leo still holding his humble metal cup. Lumina. The Admiral's voice rustled through the speakers, a sound like wind through a forest canopy. We have monitored your flight. We witnessed the entropy weapons of the Xylos halted not by a shield but by a gesture. We saw chaos repelled by creation. The Admiral paused, and the weight of centuries of despair was palpable in that silence. For eons, we have fought the Xylos with force. We met their discord with our own violence, and with every battle, we lost more of ourselves to the very silence we sought to defeat. We believed the only language they understood was power. The Admiral's gaze softened, shifting from Leo to the captain. We were wrong. You have not fought them. You have answered them. You have shown that their greatest weapon, entropy itself, is powerless against a perfect, sustained harmony. You have not waged a war, you have conducted a symphony. A profound shift occurred on the bridge of the Lumina, a collective release of a breath no one realized they were holding. This was not a rescue fleet, it was a conversion. The Sylvian remnant pledges its fleet to the harmonizer, Admiral Furion declared, its voice gaining a strength that shook the very air. But understand this clearly, we do not fight for a beverage. We fight for the principle it proves. We fight for the balance it represents, the idea that creation will always, always be more powerful than destruction. That is a cause worth the final breath of my entire civilization. One by one, the other ships echoed the pledge, their commanders' voices a chorus of different tones and languages, all united by a newfound, galvanizing hope. In moments, the Lumina went from being a lone fugitive to the command ship of a ragtag but formidable alliance. The tactical displays lit up with the positions and capabilities of their new armada. The strategy session that followed was unlike any military briefing in history. Leo stood at the central holotable not as a soldier but as a conductor. "It's all about the timing," he explained, pointing to the energy reading still emanating from his latest creation. The resonance peaks right after the pour, holds steady for a precise duration, and then begins a slow decay. "We have a window, it's not a big one." He coordinated with the admirals not on weapon discharges or shield modulation, but on brew cycles. "The Sylvian frigates, you need to make your move on my mark, right as I finish steaming the milk. That's when the harmonic frequency is at its most stable and wide-ranging. Your shields will be impervious for exactly 47 seconds. Use that time to get the civilian arcs to safety." He turned to the hulking commander of the crystalline warships. "Your main cannon's recharge cycle aligns almost perfectly with the extraction time of a double ristretto. Fire on the lead Xylo's destroyer the moment I lock the portafilter in. The resonance will amplify your beam's coherence, turning it from a blast into a scalpel." The alien commanders, veterans of 1,000 battles, listened with a focus they usually reserved for fleet-ending superweapons. They were synchronizing the fate of the galaxy to the steps of making a cup of coffee, and for the first time since the Great Silence began, it finally felt like they had a plan that could actually work. The dance was about to begin. The Allied fleet surged forward, a breathtaking constellation of defiance against the oppressive darkness of the Xylo's armada. Admiral Furion's Sylvian vessels, looking like a forest of ancient trees given flight, wove complex patterns, their bioluminescent shields flaring bright green as they intercepted volleys of corrosive plasma. The crystalline warships refracted incoming fire into harmless spectrums of light, while the heavy stone arcs formed an impenetrable barrier around the Lumina, weathering the assault with monumental patience. It was a ballet of destruction and protection, every move precisely timed to the rhythm Leo was crafting deep within the ship. Surrounded by the chaotic symphony of battle reports and the distant shudder of impacts against the shields, Leo stood at his station, a pocket of profound calm in the heart of the storm. His tools were laid out before him, his original portafilter, the bag of precious salvaged beans, a scale that measured to 1/100th of a gram, and a steaming pitcher. But his most crucial instrument was a small, holographic display fed by the ship's external sensors, showing real-time fluctuations in the cosmic radiation and gravitational waves washing over the Lumina. He understood now that these weren't interference, they were ingredients. The density of space itself, the background hum of the universe, it all affected the extraction. A gravitational surge required a slightly finer grind to compensate for the increased pressure on the water. A spike in gamma radiation meant the water temperature had to be adjusted by a single degree to prevent a bitter, over-extracted shot. As he focused, grinding a small batch of beans with a hand mill, a harsh, screeching signal overrode the Lumina's comms. It wasn't the calm, calculated voice of a Xylo's commander, but a distorted, sneering transmission, riddled with static and palpable contempt. "Your caffeine ritual ends here, primate." It hissed, the words like shattered glass. "You stir boiled beans in a cup while real power reshapes the galaxy. We will enjoy silencing your pathetic symphony." the message looped, a psychological weapon designed to break his concentration, to make him feel small and foolish. Leo's hands didn't even flinch. He simply glanced at the radiation readout, noted a minor fluctuation caused by the energy of the transmission itself, and made a microscopic adjustment to the grind setting. The insult wasn't a distraction, it was just another data point. He had spent years working a busy Saturday morning shift, crafting intricate drinks while managing a line of impatient customers, coping with malfunctioning equipment, and tuning out the chaotic noise of the cafe. The arrogant taunts of a nihilistic empire were, in many ways, easier to ignore than a customer angrily demanding a refund for a macchiato they had clearly enjoyed half of. His focus was absolute. This was no longer about saving the galaxy, it was about pulling the perfect shot. The fate of everything else would simply have to wait its turn. The Allied fleet's synchronized maneuvers had carved a precarious path through the heart of the Xylos blockade, a feat of tactical brilliance born from a barista's timing. But their destination was not another star system or a hidden base. The Lumina, alongside its newfound guardians, dropped out of slipstream at the direct coordinates the ancient elder had whispered to Leo, a place that did not exist on any of the ship's star charts. Before them hung not a planet or a space station, but a single, impossibly massive structure, an asteroid carved into the likeness of a colossal, steaming cup, its handle a graceful arch of stone that framed the void. This was the Café Eternom, the Temple of Resonance. Docking within the vast, silent harbor of the temple was like stepping into a cathedral built for giants. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and rich, the ghost of a billion brews, a fragrance that had seeped into the very stone over millennia. The walls were not adorned with weapons or shields, but with intricate mosaics crafted from thousands of different types of coffee beans, each one depicting not wars or kings, but scenes of peaceful creation, a being pouring a drink for another, a group sharing a moment of quiet conversation, a single artisan carefully tending to a plant. The message was clear. This was a place of communion, not conflict. At the very center of the temple, pulsating with a soft, internal light, stood the heart of the sanctuary. It was an espresso machine, but one of a scale and complexity that made the Lumina's replica look like a child's toy. It was a mountain of polished brass, obsidian, and crystalline tubing, covered in dials, levers, and pressure gauges marked in languages that had been dead for eons. Steam rose from its various ports in gentle, rhythmic sighs, and the entire structure hummed with a deep, foundational frequency that vibrated in Leo's bones. This was no mere appliance, it was an engine of cosmic balance. As Leo approached, the temple itself seemed to awaken. The mosaics on the walls began to glow, the beams illuminating in a specific sequence, tracing a path toward a vast stone dais covered in finely carved script. The elder, supported by two of its people, moved to the dais and gently guided Leo's hands to touch the inscriptions. The moment his fingertips, still calloused and stained from a lifetime of work, made contact, the alien symbols dissolved and rearranged themselves into words he could understand. He wasn't reading history, he was remembering it. The inscriptions told a story that rewrote his entire existence. He learned that the role of the Liquid Harmonizer was not a singular, miraculous event, but a lineage, a sacred calling that had surfaced countless times across the galaxy's history. Every few millennia, as the core's natural song would begin to falter, a being would appear, gifted with an intuitive understanding of harmonic balance. They were not scientists or warriors, they were chefs, brewers, potters, weavers, artisans whose craft involved the perfect, intentional alignment of elements. The last harmonizer before the Great Silence had been a Velen spice weaver who stabilized the core for 8,000 years by crafting soups that sang with molecular harmony. Before her, a Grathian water shaper maintained balance by tuning the resonant frequencies of ceremonial fountains. His accidental creation of the cinnamon maple horizon was not an accident at all. The inscriptions revealed that the awakening of a harmonizer is always triggered by a moment of profound, selfless intention focused entirely on the act of creation for the benefit of another. His drive that morning hadn't been to save the galaxy, it had been to bring a moment of genuine joy to a regular customer who was having a terrible day. In focusing all his skill and care into that one perfect drink, he had unconsciously aligned himself with the universe's fundamental rhythm, his latent ability sparking to life like a struck match. The celestial envoys hadn't found him by chance. They had detected the birth cry of a new harmonizer, an event their instruments had been built to scan for across the cosmos. He was not a lucky amateur. He was the next in a long line of universal guardians, and the temple was his inheritance. The colossal machine at its heart was not for him to learn. It was designed to respond to his touch, to amplify his innate talent across the galaxy. The weight of this truth settled upon him not as a burden but as a homecoming. Every frustrating shift, every burned batch of beans, every perfected latte art pattern, it had all been preparation. He had spent his entire life apprenticing for a destiny he never knew existed, and in the humming quiet of the ancient temple, surrounded by the ghosts of his predecessors, Leo Chen finally understood who he truly was. The final inscriptions on the temple dais did not present a simple set of instructions. They revealed a celestial map, a diagram of breathtaking complexity that charted the core's decay not as a single point of failure, but as a tripartite collapse. The heart of the galaxy was failing in 3 distinct harmonic frequencies at once, each one a different note in the core's dying song. To recalibrate it, to truly restart the universal symphony, would require not one perfect brew, but 3, each one a distinct beverage tailored to counter a specific strand of the discord. And they had to be created simultaneously at 3 separate altars positioned at precise harmonic coordinates within the temple itself. The ship's captain studied the diagram, its features hardening into a mask of tactical despair. The math is irrefutable, it stated, its resonant voice strained. The temporal window for the convergence is impossibly narrow. We have mere minutes. The altars are too far apart for a single being to traverse in time. It turned to Leo, its expression one of pained necessity. We must split our forces. We will need 3 teams, and harmonizer, we must split your focus. You cannot be in 3 places at once. You will have to guide the others remotely. They will be your hands. A wave of protest rose from the assembled admirals and envoys. The very idea was heresy. The resonance was a nuanced, intuitive art. How could they possibly replicate a lifetime of training in moments? But Leo's reaction was not one of panic or refusal. A slow smile spread across his face, a look of profound recognition. He looked from the anxious alien faces to the temple's murals, which depicted beings of all species sharing drinks, passing cups, teaching one another. The solution wasn't in the machine, it was in the mural. Coffee, Leo said, his voice calm and certain, cutting through the anxiety, is always better shared. It's never been about one person on a pedestal. It's about the connection, the ritual. We don't have to split my focus, we have to multiply our intention. He immediately dismissed the idea of complex lectures on extraction ratios or water chemistry. That was the language of the scientists, and it had already failed. Instead, he gathered a small group of volunteers from the different fleets, the Sylvian admiral, a celestial envoy, and a sturdy, patient captain from the crystalline warships. He led them not to the grand machine, but to a simpler, smaller replica altar. His training was not a lecture, it was a meditation. Forget everything you think you know about power or precision, he began, handing each of them a pitcher. This isn't about force, it's about listening. He had them first just feel the weight of the portafilter in their hands to understand its balance. He showed them how to tamp the grounds not with muscle, but with a firm, even pressure that came from the shoulder, a gesture of confident settling. You're not packing it down, you're preparing a bed for the water to flow through. he explained, his own movements effortless and smooth. The most crucial lesson was the pour. He stood behind the Sylvian admiral, guiding its long, graceful hands with his own. "Don't fight the milk," he murmured. "Let the steam do the work. Listen to the sound. It should be a soft, consistent hiss, not a scream. You're stretching it, introducing tiny bubbles of air, making it silky. When the pitcher becomes almost too hot to touch, that's when you know it's ready." It's not a timer, it's a feeling. He taught them the wrist motion for the pour, a gentle, rhythmic rocking that was less about control and more about allowing the pattern to emerge naturally from the flow. "Your job isn't to create the design," he said. "Your job is to bring the milk and the coffee together. The design is what happens when they meet properly." It's a collaboration. He watched as the celestial envoy, a being used to manipulating energy fields with microscopic precision, initially overthought the process. It's poured jerky and uncertain. But then, as it focused on the sound and the feel rather than the outcome, its movements became fluid, almost dance-like. The crystalline captain, whose people communicated through light refraction, seemed to understand intuitively how the light would catch the layers of foam and crema, adjusting its angle to beautiful effect. They weren't just following steps, they were connecting to the principle. They were learning the rhythm. By the time the temple's central chronometer began its final countdown to the convergence window, the three teams were not just prepared technicians, they were initiates, each carrying a spark of the harmonizer's intention, ready to become his hands at the distant altars. The fate of the galaxy now rested on a lesson in basic pouring technique, and for the first time it felt like enough. The temple's central chamber thrummed with a rising energy, a chorus of three separate frequencies beginning to harmonize as the teams at their distant altars worked in perfect synchronicity. Leo stood at the primary console, his hands flying across the ancient controls, his voice a steady stream of guidance through the comms to his three apprentices. "Admiral, a little more pressure on the tamp, yes, just like that. Envoy, your milk is almost there, ease back on the steam now." The colossal machine responded to their collective intention, its brass and crystal components glowing brighter, the deep hum resonating through the stone floor and vibrating in their very teeth. They were moments away from the convergence, seconds from achieving the impossible. It was in that final, breathless moment that the xylos struck. A section of the temple's carved ceiling detonated inward, not with a roar, but with a silent, voracious implosion, as if a patch of reality itself had simply been erased. Three xylos assassins, their armor sharper and more focused than any they had faced before, dropped into the chamber on strands of corrosive darkness. They ignored the altars, the machine, even Leo himself. Their target was the source of the protective energy surrounding him, the celestial envoy who had been his first guardian, who now stood at his side, its energy shield flaring to life in a brilliant violet dome. The ensuing fight was a brutal, silent ballet of light and shadow. The envoy moved with a speed that blurred its form, intercepting blasts of entropic energy meant for Leo, parrying with blades of solidified sound. But the assassins were prepared. Their weapons weren't designed to pierce shields, they were designed to unravel them. One of the attackers fired a projectile that didn't explode, but instead unfolded into a complex, wire-like net that settled over the envoy's shield, its strands vibrating at a dissonant frequency that caused the protective barrier to shatter like glass. In the split second that followed, the lead assassin lunged. Its weapon wasn't a blade or a gun, but a needle-thin lance of pure nothingness. It didn't stab, it phased through the envoy's armor as if it weren't there, seeking the life force beneath. The envoy didn't cry out, it simply staggered, a look of profound shock on its elegant features as a spiderweb of black energy began to crawl across its chest from the point of impact. With a final, tremendous effort, it unleashed a concussive wave of pure harmonic force that hurled the assassins backward, buying a precious handful of seconds. Leo caught the falling envoy as its legs gave way, lowering it gently to the cold stone floor. The chaotic noise of the battle, the hum of the machine, the shouts from the comms, it all faded into a muffled haze. The envoy's large, dark eyes, once filled with ancient wisdom, were now clouded with pain, but they found Leo's and held his gaze with an impossible intensity. Its voice, when it came, was no longer a synthesized melody but a faint, breathy whisper, the being's true voice emerging for the first and last time. The resonance it must hold, it breathed, a tremor racking its form. Its slender, three-fingered hand closed around Leo's wrist, its grip surprisingly strong. "Do not let our song end here." It paused, drawing a ragged breath, and a flicker of its old, wry demeanor surfaced through the agony. It gave a weak, almost imperceptible nod toward the gleaming portafilter locked into the main altar. For the galaxy, it whispered, its voice fading to nothing. "Make it a double shot." The light left its eyes, the hand around Leo's wrist went limp. The being who had pulled him from a burning cafe, who had explained the nature of the great silence, who had fought and bled for a hope it could barely remember, was gone. A cold, pure silence descended upon Leo, a void where grief and rage should have been. He gently laid his friend's head on the floor and rose to his feet. The assassins were already recovering, their weapons reorienting on him, but he no longer saw them. His entire world had narrowed to the espresso machine, to the portafilter, to the final, sacred instruction. The command to make it a double shot wasn't a literal order for more caffeine. It was a final, profound lesson. It was a plea for intensity, for fortification, for a resonance so powerful and concentrated it could not be denied. It was the last gift his protector could give him. Leo's movements became deliberate, ritualistic. He ignored the advancing assassins, the shouts of warning from the other teams over the comms. He unlocked the portafilter, discarded the spent grounds, and reached for his last precious measure of beans. His hands did not shake, his breath was even. He ground the beans not with haste but with a focused, meditative slowness, feeling the texture, listening to the crunch, honoring the sacrifice that had bought him this moment. He tamped the fresh grounds with a new, unwavering certainty, the weight of a friend's final wish behind the motion. He locked the portafilter into the group head, his touch firm and final. As the first Xylo's assassin raised its weapon, Leo placed both hands on the ancient levers of the machine. He didn't pull the shot, he initiated a sacrament. The rich, dark liquid that began to stream forth wasn't just coffee. It was a eulogy, a promise, and a weapon all in one. It flowed with a golden crema that shone with its own inner light, and the hum of the temple's machine shifted, deepening into a note so profound and powerful that the very stone of the floor began to vibrate, not with chaos, but with the absolute, unbreakable certainty of a promise being kept. The hum of the temple's grand machine swelled into a singular, unified chord, resonating through the ancient stone as the three streams of liquid harmony began to pour. At the distant altars, guided by Leo's calm voice over the comms, the Sylvian admiral, the crystalline captain, and the celestial envoy moved in perfect synchrony. From the primary console, Leo watched the holodisplay, his hands resting lightly on the controls, his entire being focused on the convergence. Three distinct beverages, each a masterpiece of its kind, met their cups at the exact same instant. A caramel-hued latte art rosetta blossomed under the admiral's careful pour. A dark, shimmering ristretto pooled in the captain's crystalline vessel, and a perfectly layered macchiato settled in the envoy's cup. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a silent shockwave of pure, golden energy erupted from each altar, not as a destructive blast, but as a visible ripple of stability that shot upward, piercing the temple's vaulted ceiling and streaking across the void toward the galactic core. The three streams of light converged just as they reached the dying heart of the galaxy, weaving together into a brilliant, intricate lattice of harmonic energy. On the main viewer, the terrifying, chaotic static of the core didn't just pause, it began to recede. The violent swirls of black and purple energy softened, smoothed, and were gently pushed back by the advancing wave of golden light. Pinpricks of stable, newborn stars flickered to life within the newly calmed space, their light steady and sure. A chorus of disbelieving, triumphant cheers erupted over the calm's channel, a cacophony of different languages and voices all united by a single, overwhelming emotion: hope. The Sylvian admiral's rustling voice was filled with awe. The readings are stable, the decay rate is reversing. The crystalline captain added, its tone echoing with uncharacteristic excitement. The harmonic frequency is holding. It's propagating through nearby star systems. Leo allowed himself a single, shuddering breath of relief, his eyes fixed on the beautiful, healing light on the screen. After eons of silence, the galaxy was beginning to sing again. The celebration lasted for all of 5 seconds. A new presence blotted out the emerging starlight on the main viewer, emerging from a tear in space so violent it seemed to bleed darkness into the void. It was the Xylo's flagship, the annihilator of song. It dwarfed every other ship present, a jagged claw of obsidian and tortured metal that seemed to embody the very concept of entropy. It did not fire its conventional weapons. Instead, a massive aperture opened along its spine, and from it erupted a beam of something that was not light, not energy, but the absolute absence of both. It was a wave of targeted, absolute silence. Where it passed, the triumphant cheers on the comms cut out into dead air. The golden, healing light from the convergent wave didn't just dim, it was actively consumed, eaten away by the advancing edge of nothingness. The Xylos weren't just attacking, they were unleashing the final, perfected embodiment of their philosophy, a weapon that didn't destroy but uncreated, silencing the new song of the galaxy at its very source. The fragile wave of hope met the absolute wall of silence, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed the great silence would have the last word after all. The carefully woven tapestry of golden light, the beautiful lattice of harmonic energy that was slowly calming the galactic core, didn't just stop advancing. It began to unravel. The effect was sickeningly silent, a visual catastrophe that felt like a scream in the void. The beam from the Xylo's flagship wasn't an attack in any conventional sense, it was a negation. It didn't burn or blast the harmonic energy, it simply dissolved the connections holding it together. The intricate patterns of light, so full of promise and stability, frayed at the edges like a tapestry consumed by invisible moths, their vibrant gold fading into a dull, lifeless gray before winking out of existence entirely. On the bridge of the Lumina, the triumphant cheers turned to cries of alarm as their own systems registered the effect. The ship's newfound, steady hum began to waver, the lights flickering not with the violence of before, but with a sickly, uncertain rhythm. The resonance is destabilizing, a science officer cried out, its voice laced with a terror they hadn't even shown when facing direct plasma fire. The energy pattern is disassembling. The molecular bonds in the harmonic field are being selectively broken. It's not a weapon, it's a decreator. Then the voice came. It wasn't broadcast through their comms, it seemed to emanate from the very air around them, a dry, rasping whisper that carried the cold of absolute zero and the absolute certainty of despair. It was the voice of the Xylo's emperor, your fragile harmony, it hissed, each word feeling like a chip of ice against their souls, is a temporary anomaly in an eternal sea of silence. You build with light and sound, little maker. You think your weak bonds of intention can withstand the fundamental truth of the universe. Everything returns to dust. All energy degrades, all structure falls. We do not fight you, we merely expedite the inevitable. A wave of psychic force accompanied the words, a crushing sense of futility that threatened to extinguish hope itself. Your song is already forgotten, your creation is already undone. Behold the power of true order, the glorious peace of the great silence. Within the temple, the physical manifestation of the attack was even more horrifying. The three beverages at the altars, the very sources of the harmonic wave, began to visually decay. The beautiful rosetta in the Admiral's cup didn't collapse, its layers simply separated, the milk and coffee retreating from each other as if they had never been combined, the foam subsiding into flat, lifeless liquid. The dark, shimmering ristretto in the captain's vessel lost its oily, prismatic sheen, turning into a murky, separated puddle of water and bitter grounds. The perfect layers of the envoy's macchiato blurred and merged into a single, homogeneous and utterly inert beige sludge. The molecular bonds that Leo's intention and his apprentice's care had forged were being systematically and perfectly taken apart. The Xylo's emperor was right. They weren't being defeated, they were being unmade. The triumphant wave of harmonic energy had not just been halted, it was being meticulously deconstructed, molecule by molecule, by the Xylo's emperor's terrifying weapon of absolute silence. On the viewer, the beautiful golden lattice frayed into grey dust and vanished. Within the temple, the physical beverages themselves were decaying, their carefully crafted bonds dissolving before their eyes as if the very act of their creation was being edited out of reality. The macchiato's distinct layers bled into a murky puddle, the rosetta's delicate petals wilted into formless foam. The profound hum of the great machine faltered, its light dimming to a sickly flicker. The crushing psychic whisper of the emperor promised only the cold, inevitable peace of absolute nothingness. In that suffocating silence, under the weight of a galaxy's extinguished hope, Leo's mind did not race toward complex physics or alien technology. It did something far more human. It retreated. It sought shelter in a memory, a moment of personal, quiet failure from a lifetime ago. He was 21 again, a nervous new hire at his first coffee shop, over-caffeinated and shaking as he presented his trainer with a cappuccino. The milk was scalded, the espresso was bitter, and the whole thing was an acrid, unpalatable mess. His trainer, a kind older woman named Maria, hadn't scolded him. She'd simply taken a tiny pinch of salt from the condiment station and stirred it into the center of the dreadful drink. "Here, try it now," she'd said. The change was miraculous. The salt hadn't made the coffee taste salty. It had performed a kind of alchemy, rounding out the harsh bitterness, mellowing the burnt notes, and somehow revealing a hidden sweetness he hadn't known was there. It was a simple, humble trick of the trade, a piece of human kitchen wisdom passed down for generations. That long-buried memory surfaced now with the clarity of a lightning strike. His eyes snapped open, scanning the ancient, alien console before him. His fingers flew over crystalline controls, pulling up a real-time molecular readout of the decaying harmonic field. The data was a nightmare of unraveling quantum connections, but at its heart he saw it a specific, volatile strand of energy, a piercingly bitter frequency that was acting as the primary catalyst for the entire collapse. The Emperor's silence wasn't a blunt force, it was a precise scalpel, expertly severing the bonds at their weakest point, and that point was this one aggressively unstable note. There was no time for discussion, for permission, for doubt. While the scientists around him stared in paralyzed horror at their failing instruments, Leo's hand dove into the small, hidden pocket of his apron. From it, he pulled a tiny, crumpled paper packet, salt stolen from a diner months ago and forgotten about until this very second. With a focus that shut out the roaring void and the dissolving heavens, he tore it open. He ignored the gasps of the alien council, the shouted questions that were lost in the cacophony. He didn't throw it into the machine. Instead, he carefully poured the tiny white crystals into the palm of his hand, closed his eyes, and then, with a flick of his wrist, scattered the salt directly into the path of the energy stream flowing from his primary altar into the grand machine. The reaction was neither explosive nor gentle. It was a profound, instantaneous correction. The faint, piercing shriek of the decaying frequency, a sound no one had realized they could hear until it was gone, vanished. In its place, the harmonic wave, which had been fraying into nothingness, suddenly snapped taut. the golden light, which had been fading to gray, flared with a new, deeper, more stable intensity, its hue shifting from a bright, almost frantic gold to a rich, steady amber. The entire temple shuddered, not with violence, but with the deep, satisfying click of a key turning in a lock it was always meant to fit. On the main viewer, the Xylo's beam of silence didn't just stop. It recoiled, repelled by the newly fortified harmonic field. The unraveling of the galaxy's core ceased. The lead science officer, who had been monitoring the quantum field stability with instruments he'd built over 1,000 lifetimes, stared at his screen, his features a mask of utter, incomprehensible shock. His voice, when it finally emerged, was not a shout of triumph but a breathless, disbelieving whisper that cut through the chaos, laden with an awe that bordered on terror. By the first galaxies, since when does sodium chloride stabilize quantum field harmonics? The answer, of course, wasn't in their databases of cosmic energy or their models of molecular resonance. It was in 1,000 human kitchens, in 1,000,000 cups of coffee made a little better by a grandmother's instinct, a chef's secret, a bartender's trick. It was in the understanding that sometimes the most powerful catalyst for balance isn't a grand, complex solution, but a simple, earthly counterpoint. The Emperor's weapon of perfect, arrogant silence had just been defeated by a humble pinch of salt. The silence that followed the salt's miraculous intervention was not the crushing void of the Emperor's weapon, but a profound, charged quiet, the kind that hangs in the air after a thunderclap. The repelled beam of nothingness had recoiled into the void, and the annihilator of song hung motionless for a moment, as if its vast, malevolent intelligence was recalculating the very laws of physics. Leo didn't wait for its next move. He stepped away from the humming console of the grand machine, his movements calm and deliberate. He picked up his original scarred portafilter, the one piece of home that had survived it all, and walked toward the center of the chamber, into the open space where the ceiling had been torn away, putting himself in full view of the impossible warship that blotted out the stars. He spoke then, his voice not a shout, but a clear, steady projection that carried across the temple, and he knew, across every open channel the Allied fleet could muster. "You have spent eons studying the collapse of civilizations," he began, his gaze fixed on the dark heart of the Xylo's flagship. "You have charts and models predicting the heat death of every star. You understand the mathematics of silence better than any being ever has, but in all your watching you never truly saw." He held up the portafilter, a simple, unadorned piece of metal. "You see this as a tool for a chemical reaction, a primitive ritual. You were so focused on the energy signature it produced that you missed the meaning behind it." He locked the portafilter into a smaller, secondary brewer, his hands moving with a serene, unhurried grace that was itself an act of defiance. "You sought ultimate control through absolute destruction. You believed that by being the last thing standing in a dead universe, you would be the most powerful, but that's not power, that's just being alone in an empty room." He ground a measure of beans, the sound a soft, rhythmic crunch that was the only noise in the vast chamber. True power, the only power that has ever truly mattered in any corner of this galaxy, is the ability to create something that brings people together. To make a space where someone feels seen and heard and valued, if only for a few minutes, to offer warmth and comfort and a moment of peace. That connection, that tiny spark of shared experience, creates a resonance that your equations could never quantify and your weapons can never silence. As he spoke, he prepared a small pitcher of milk, heating it until it sang with that perfect, consistent hiss. He pulled a double shot of espresso, rich and dark with a tiger-striped crema that spoke of a flawless extraction. He did not look at the looming ship, he looked only at the cup. "You thought you were fighting a beverage, you were wrong. You were fighting the idea that we are better together than we are apart. You were fighting the hope that our best days aren't behind us, and that," he said, finally looking up, his eyes meeting the implied gaze of the Emperor, is a war you are always destined to lose. With a final, fluid motion, he poured the steamed milk into the espresso. He didn't craft an intricate pattern of leaves or hearts. He created a simple, perfect circle of white foam within the dark liquid, a symbol of wholeness, of completion. As the circle closed, the beverage began to emit a visible frequency, a soft, golden pulse of light that expanded outward in a gentle, continuous wave. This was not the aggressive, targeted harmonic used to heal the core. This was something subtler, far more profound. It was a frequency of pure, unassailable peace. The wave passed through the temple walls as if they weren't there and washed over the Xylo's armada. There were no explosions, no shields failed. Instead, the malevolent green glow of their weapon arrays simply winked out. The humming aura of entropic energy that surrounded each ship dissipated like mist in the morning sun. The countless targeting locks they had on the Allied fleet disengaged, their systems not jammed but gently persuaded to stand down. The annihilator of song itself seemed to quiet. The psychic whisper of the Emperor faded from the minds of every being present, not shouted down but soothed into silence. Their weapons weren't destroyed, they were disarmed, rendered inert and irrelevant by a frequency that spoke not of conflict but of ceasefire. The Xylos had been disarmed not by a superior force but by a superior idea made manifest in a simple cup of coffee. The vast, silent bridge of the Annihilator of Song was a monument to absolute control, a place where every sound was measured, every light calibrated, and every emotion extinguished. The Xylo's Emperor sat upon a throne not of metal or stone, but of solidified nothingness, a seat that seemed to draw the very warmth from the air around it. For millennia, he had perceived the universe as a flawed, noisy equation slowly simplifying into the beautiful, clean silence of entropy. He was the ultimate arbiter of that silence, the architect of the final piece. Now that perfect, logical vision was being unraveled by a frequency he could not categorize, a resonance born not of superior technology, but of something far more confounding, simple kindness. He watched on the main viewer as the lone human, the so-called harmonizer, finished preparing a beverage. There was no grand ceremony, no complex machinery, just the quiet, deliberate actions of a craftsman. A single, small shuttle, escorted not by warships but by the Sylvian admiral's leaf-like vessel, now detached from the temple and approached his flagship. Its cargo was not a bomb or a weapon of mass destruction. It was a single, steaming cup carried by the celestial envoy who had first found Leo, its features set in a mask of solemn purpose. The Emperor's first instinct was to vaporize the insignificant vessel and its insultingly simple offering. Yet a sliver of something alien, not curiosity, but a need to comprehend the nature of this illogical defeat stayed his hand. He allowed the envoy to dock. The envoy walked onto the bridge, the soft glow of its form a stark contrast to the consuming darkness of the throne room. It said nothing, it simply bowed its head and offered the cup. The Emperor stared at it, his featureless faceplate reflecting the simple ceramic vessel. This was the source of the resonance that had neutralized his entire armada. This was the artifact that had challenged eons of his work. With a dismissive flick of his wrist, he commanded a nearby drone to analyze it. The results were immediate and baffling. The readings showed a complex yet stable molecular structure. There were no exotic particles, no hidden energy sources. It was, by all quantifiable metrics, just coffee. A wave of contemptuous fury washed over him. Had they truly been bested by this, he took the cup, his armored fingers looking grotesquely large and brutal around its delicate curve. He would consume it, this symbol of their defiance, and in doing so, demonstrate its ultimate meaninglessness. He would show them that even their greatest creation would end in the silence of his digestion. He lifted the faceplate of his helmet, revealing a face that was pale, severe, and etched with the cold certainty of absolute power. He did not sip, he drank. The first sensation was not taste but warmth. A simple, physical warmth that spread through his throat and into his chest, a feeling so mundane and yet so utterly forgotten that it gave him a moment's pause. Then the flavor unfolded. It was not a single note but a chorus, the deep, earthy richness of the coffee, the subtle, comforting sweetness of the perfectly steamed milk, the faint, spicy hint of cinnamon. Each component was distinct, yet they were woven together into a seamless, harmonious whole. It was a complexity that did not clash but cooperated, and then it happened. A memory, not a date, a file to be accessed, but a feeling to be experienced. A sudden, visceral flash of a sunlight he had not seen in 1,000 lifetimes, warming the skin of a world he had condemned to dust. The sound of laughter, not as a disruptive noise, but as a joyful vibration. The feeling of a hand held in his, not in submission, but in connection. The emotions, long since surgically removed and dismissed as evolutionary weaknesses, crashed over him not as a wave, but as a gentle, relentless tide. He felt a profound, aching sense of peace, of belonging, of a harmony that was not imposed by force but cultivated with care. His hand began to tremble. The cup, now half empty, rattled softly in its grasp. The cold, imposing figure of the emperor seemed to shrink, the armor that was his prison suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. He looked at the envoy, his eyes, for the first time in centuries, showing not calculation, but a bewildered, devastating pain. The voice that emerged from his lips was not the rasping, imperial command that could silence stars. It was a broken, whispered confession, ragged with a grief he never knew he possessed. We had forgotten, he breathed, the words hanging in the silent air, what harmony felt like. The weight of his own words, of the feeling itself, seemed to crush him. He saw his grand design for what it truly was, not a glorious destiny, but a terrified retreat from the beautiful, terrifying chaos of existence. He had sought to silence the universe because he could not bear the pain of its music. He had not been a god overseeing entropy. He had been a child, hands clamped over his ears, screaming for the noise to stop. With a final, shuddering breath that was both a surrender and a liberation, he gave the order that would echo through history. "Stand down," he whispered to his vast, waiting armada. "All forces, stand down." The weapon that had threatened all of creation was finally, completely, and voluntarily disarmed, not by force, but by a single, remembered feeling of warmth in a cup. The final, perfect sip taken by the emperor was not an ending, but a beginning, the first note of a symphony that had been silent for 1,000,000 years. As the command to stand down spread through the Xylo's armada, a new energy began to emanate from the heart of the temple, from the cup in Leo's hand, and from the very intention behind the act. It was a wave, but not one of force or destruction. It was a gentle, pervasive tide of reconnection, a golden resonance that flowed outward at the speed of thought itself, seeking out every broken strand in the fabric of reality and patiently, lovingly weaving it back together. Across the galaxy, the effects were not explosions of light but quiet miracles of restoration. On the viewing screens, the Allied fleets watched as a star on the verge of a supernova collapse, its light guttering like a candle in the wind, suddenly steadied. The violent, unstable fluctuations in its core calmed, its fiery corona swelling not with destructive rage, but with a renewed, healthy vigor, burning with a stable, golden hue that promised billions more years of life-giving warmth. A fractured world, its continents torn asunder by gravitational tides from a decaying orbit, witnessed its seismic nightmares cease. The gargantuan cracks in its surface didn't just stop growing. They began to slowly, impossibly, knit back together, the planet itself sighing in relief as it settled back into a stable rotation, its atmosphere clearing for the first time in centuries. This was not a reboot or a reset, it was a healing. On 1,000 silent worlds, in the depths of space and on the surfaces of dead moons, species long thought lost to the great silence began to stir. Hibernation chambers buried deep beneath ice fields, their inhabitants preserved in stasis against the fading of their suns, hummed to life as power returned to their systems. Communication arrays that had broadcast nothing but static for generations suddenly crackled with tentative, bewildered signals, the first words of civilizations waking from a long, terrible nightmare. They looked up not to warships or invaders, but to a sky suddenly filled with stable, familiar constellations, and they felt a feeling they had no name for, a profound, grounding sense of safety. And at the center of it all, they saw him, not on their view screens but in their minds, a shared vision gifted by the harmonic resonance, a human figure standing not on a bridge or a throne but behind a simple counter. They watched his hands, scarred and stained, as they moved with an unhurried grace, grinding the beans, steaming the milk, pouring the shot. They saw the focus in his eyes, the absolute presence in the act of creation. This was the cosmic stage, and the performance was one of humble, meticulous care. He was not a god conducting the cosmos with a wave of his hand. He was a barista doing his job. And in that simple, universal truth, the sacredness of doing one's craft with intention and care, every being that witnessed it understood the source of their salvation. The galaxy wasn't being saved by a weapon. It was being healed by a ritual. The dust of cosmic conflict had barely settled when the first foundations of the first interstellar cafe were laid, not on Earth, but at a carefully chosen neutral nexus point where the ley lines of a dozen major spatial trade routes gently converged. The Galactic Council, in its newfound wisdom, understood that the fragile peace brokered by a beverage needed a permanent home, a sanctuary not for negotiation but for connection. They didn't commission a grand hall of polished crystal or an imposing chamber of state. Instead, they built a cafe. Under Leo's exacting direction, it was constructed to feel intentionally, comfortingly familiar. The central bar was crafted from reclaimed oak shipped from Earth, the floor a mosaic of ceramic tiles from 100 different peaceful worlds, and the air was perpetually filled with the warm, rich scent of roasting beans, a universal aroma that now signaled sanctuary. Leo's new role was unlike any he could have imagined. He was no longer just a barista or even the revered harmonizer. He was now the head trainer of the Interstellar Barista Corps. His first apprentice was a being from the Xylothian system, a species that had been on the brink of war with the Sylvians mere months before. Xylothians possessed 7 multi-jointed limbs, a physiology that seemed both a tremendous advantage and a potential disaster behind an espresso machine. On the apprentice's first day, its limbs moved in a frantic, uncoordinated ballet, sending a portafilter clattering to the floor and overstretching milk into a scalded, frothy mess. The being's large, compound eyes shimmered with a frustration that needed no translation. Leo didn't correct its technique with complex diagrams of pressure curves or molecular extraction models. He simply placed a single, perfect coffee bean in the center of his own palm and gestured for the apprentice to do the same with one of its many hands. "It's not about the mechanics first," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's about the ingredient. Close your eyes, feel its weight, its density, the subtle oils on its surface." The Xylothian hesitated, then complied, its complex faceplate shifting into an expression of intense focus. "That bean," Leo continued, "was grown on a world you've never seen, under a sun with a different spectral frequency. It was harvested by hands that might look nothing like yours, dried by winds that carry the scent of alien oceans. It journeyed across light years to be here, in this moment, with us." He paused, letting the significance of that journey settle in the quiet air between them. The machine is just a tool. The true craft is in honoring that journey. The bean doesn't care about your politics or your history. It only asks for your attention. And if you give it, it will give you back something that can connect you to anyone, anywhere. He opened his eyes and looked directly at his multi-limbed student, a faint smile on his face. "Remember, the bean connects us all." This philosophy became the cornerstone of the cafe's existence. It was not a mere symbolic gesture, it was a functional, living doctrine. the cafe's layout was deliberately designed without isolated booths or private rooms. The tables were large, circular, and made from a single piece of resonant stone that subtly amplified the pleasant hum of conversation, forcing a kind of pleasant acoustic intimacy. The menu, while featuring Earth classics, was rapidly expanded to include beverages inspired by the tastes of countless member species, a gently glowing fungal tea from the mycelial networks, a sparkling mineral-infused tonic from the crystalline beings, even a non-caffeinated, nutrient-rich steamed broth for species that found caffeine toxic. The act of sharing a table was no longer a political negotiation. It was a culinary adventure. Soon, the most remarkable sight in the known galaxy was not a glittering fleet or a celestial phenomenon, but the bustling interior of the first interstellar cafe during its peak hours. A hulking Grathian in heavy stone armor would sit sipping a tiny porcelain demitasse of espresso, its rough hands carefully cradling the delicate cup. At the same table, a wispy, energy-based being from the Azure Nebula would hover, its form flickering in contentment as it absorbed the steam from a mug of specially calibrated chamomile. A Xylos engineer, its sharp, angular features now often softened with a pensive expression, could be seen deep in conversation with a Sylvian botanist over the shared challenge of perfecting a low-acid blend for a species with sensitive digestion. The clinking of cups became the new sound of diplomacy, a language far more effective than any formal treaty. Arguments that had stalled for centuries in council chambers were often resolved over a shared pot of pour-over, the simple, ritualistic act of waiting for the brew to finish, creating a space for patience and understanding to grow. The cafe didn't erase millennia of mistrust and conflict, but it provided a neutral, wholesome ground where the work of building something better could finally begin, one carefully crafted and deeply connecting cup at a time. Leo's life had settled into a rhythm more vast and wondrous than anything he could have imagined, a cosmic dance between the familiar and the utterly alien. He did return to Earth, of course, but the visits were no longer a return to normalcy. They were more akin to a curator revisiting a beloved, smaller exhibit after a day spent managing an entire museum of the universe. He'd walk the streets of his rebuilt neighborhood, now a bustling, starport-adjacent district humming with off-world visitors, and the sheer normalcy of it was what felt strangest of all. He could order a simple black coffee from a corner shop and be just another customer, a fleeting moment of beautiful anonymity he cherished deeply. His primary role, officially bestowed upon him by the newly formed Galactic Council, was that of the first Galactic Coffee Ambassador, a title that never failed to make him smile. This was no ceremonial post, it was a mission of discovery and connection. His days were spent aboard a sleek, custom-built vessel, the Steaming Star, which was less a warship and more a mobile, state-of-the-art coffee laboratory. His itinerary was the galaxy itself, charting courses to newly contacted worlds and rediscovering civilizations that had been lost to the Great Silence. His quest was singular, to find and document new cosmic beings and ancient brewing methods. He'd wade through fields of bioluminescent coffee plants on a world with 3 purple suns, their cherries glowing with a soft internal light and possessing a flavor profile with notes of nebula gas and candied starlight. He'd sit with venerable brewmasters from species of floating gas clouds who taught him how they used precise magnetic fields to agitate particles into a perfectly emulsified, ethereal espresso. He learned to brew with water mined from the crystalline rings of gas giants, each imparting a unique mineral signature to the cup. His log entries weren't just about taste and aroma. They were anthropological studies recording the rituals, the stories, and the cultural significance of each beverage. A cup wasn't just a drink, it was a window into the soul of a civilization. And back on Earth, at the very epicenter of this galactic renaissance, stood his old cafe. It hadn't been turned into a sterile museum or a government building. By universal demand, it had been restored to its exact state at the moment of its destruction, right down to the faint smell of oat milk and the scuff marks on the floor behind the counter. But now, above the door, hung a new, simple sign, crafted from a piece of whole metal salvaged from a Xylo scout ship and polished to a soft gleam. It read, "Where the galaxy was saved one cup at a time." It had become the most unexpected pilgrimage site in human history. Beings from every corner of the known cosmos made the journey, not to gawk or to take pictures, but to simply stand in the space where the unthinkable had happened. A hulking, stone-like Grathian might be seen carefully sipping a cortado at the very counter where Leo had once thrown a scalding portafilter, its rocky features softened in contemplation. A pair of celestial envoys would often be found maintaining a quiet vigil, their presence a silent tribute to their fallen comrade. The café was no longer just a place of business. It was a living monument to the idea that the smallest acts of creation could tip the scales against the vast weight of entropy. It stood as a permanent, warm, and inviting rebuttal to despair, a testament written not in stone, but in steam and shared connection. Years had woven themselves into the fabric of the galaxy like cream swirling into a dark roast, creating something rich, complex, and beautifully settled. The first Interstellar Café thrived as the bustling heart of a healed cosmos, its tables perpetually filled with the gentle hum of 1,000 different conversations in 1,000 different languages. Leo, his hair now touched with threads of silver but his hands as steady as ever, moved behind the main bar with the quiet confidence of a master at peace with his craft. He was no longer the wide-eyed barista from a ruined shop. He was a living legend who preferred the simple weight of a portafilter to any ceremonial medal. The peaceful rhythm of the day was suddenly interrupted by a subtle shift in the café's ambient light. The soft, golden glow emanating from the central core display, a real-time feed of the now stable galactic heart, flickered for a fraction of a second. A low harmonic chime echoed through the room, a notification not of danger but of imbalance. Patrons looked up from their drinks, not with fear but with a familiar, curious concern. A young Xylothian apprentice, her 7 limbs pausing mid-pour, called out, her voice a series of melodic clicks that were instantly translated. "Master Leo." The core display, it's the newborn star in the Serpentes Nebula, its resonances fluctuating. On the screen, the visual was breathtaking yet concerning. A fledgling star, a swirling cauldron of brilliant gold and blue energy, was pulsing erratically, its light stuttering as it fought to find its stable rhythm in the cosmic symphony. It was a natural, if precarious, celestial event, the universe's way of testing its new creations. Before Leo could even formulate a response, a small figure tugged at the hem of his apron. It was a young alien child, a member of a species Leo had helped bring out of the great silence, its large, luminous eyes wide with anxiety that mirrored the star's unstable flickering. "Master Harmonizer," the child asked, its voice a tiny, worried whisper. "The little star is sick. Will you make a special drink to fix it? Will you save it again?" The question hung in the air, sweet and sincere, and for a moment the entire café seemed to lean in, listening for the answer of the being who had once brewed a galaxy back to health. Leo looked down at the child, then at the concerned faces of his diverse patrons. He slowly finished wiping the steam wand, his movements deliberate and calm. He reached for a clean cup, not to create a universe-saving elixir, but to pour himself a simple black coffee from the batch he just brewed. He took a slow, appreciative sip, savoring the familiar warmth, the deep notes of earth and chocolate, the perfect balance he had achieved that morning. Setting the cup down with a soft click, he knelt, bringing himself to the child's eye level. His smile was not the proud grin of a hero, but the gentle, knowing expression of a teacher. "The universe," he began, his voice warm and quiet, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room, "doesn't need one savior in a lonely café. It never did." He paused, letting the words settle. "The real magic wasn't in my hands alone. It was in the intention behind the act. It is in the care that your people take in weaving your light tapestries, the precision the Grathians use to polish their crystals, the patience the Sylvians show when nurturing their star seeds. His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of apprentices, ambassadors, and engineers. True harmony is a chorus, not a solo. The universe needs everyone to find their own perfect brew, their own unique way of creating something that adds a little warmth, a little balance, a little beauty to the great cosmic counter. With that, he rose and turned to the young Xylothian apprentice who had first noticed the fluctuation. He reached for his original scarred portafilter, the metal worn smooth by a lifetime of use, and held it out to her. The star's resonance is pitching sharp. It needs a deeper, warmer frequency to counter it. A dark roast, I think, coarse grind, 96.3 degrees Celsius. But, he said, a sparkle in his eye as he released the tool into her waiting limb. You already knew that, didn't you? It's your turn to listen. It's your turn to pour. The apprentice's nervous clicking stilled, replaced by a look of profound understanding. She accepted the portafilter, its weight a new kind of responsibility, and turned toward the beans with a focus that was entirely her own. Leo stepped back, taking another sip of his coffee, a silent spectator now in the endless, beautiful ritual of creation, watching as the next generation began to find its rhythm.